Biondi know where to go with it. Woodley lost the handle, and it's the Knights who come up with it. Edwards, and he finishes. Ryan Edwards gets his double figures. He's got 10.
This is the Westmoreland on the Hardwood Podcast on the Westmoreland Sports Network. Here are your hosts, Jack Ridenour and Sean Meyers.
And we welcome you into another edition of the Westmoreland on the Hardwood Podcast here on the Westmoreland Sports Network. Sean Meyers, Jack Ridenour. And Jack, another week of doing this and a lot to get to. We've got plenty to discuss in this very quick-paced show. We're going to, of course, have the plays of the week, everyone's favorite segment. We'll talk about our team of the week. It's the Yough boys. This is the first boys team that we've had for our team of the week. We've been very heavy on the girls because a lot of the Westmoreland County girls teams have been outstanding. So we'll talk a little bit more detail about the Yough boys. We'll also have the trivia question, the answer from last week's question, and a new question we'll pose for this week. And a look ahead at next week's games. And there's going to be some really significant ones, especially now that it's starting to get to the playoff picture becoming clear, games becoming all the more significant for that. But first, we'll begin with our starting five takeaways, the biggest stories from Westmoreland County high school basketball from this past week. And one that we have to start with, unfortunately, it's a bit of a downer for Westmoreland County. You and I had a front row seat to see Jeanette boys shockingly lose to Sarah Catholic. A game that the Jayhawks led 22-3 early in the second quarter. Ultimately, it slipped away. Now, I think Jeanette's probably still a playoff team, but man, this one really has to sting, and it has some real implications too.
Yeah, I mean, you want to talk about a meltdown or a collapse, unraveling, whatever you want to describe it as. That's exactly what happened to Jeanette on Friday. And I remember mentioning to you during the broadcast, because you brought up a good point about what kind of adjustment did Sarah Catholic need to make. And I mentioned that they came out in a zone, and Jeanette, they did a great job at picking it apart. Their ball movement was really good. Gio Marola, if I'm not mistaken, had 14 points in that first half, 14 of his 20. So again, was able to get open along the perimeter. And then Sarah Catholic comes out in the second half and they throw a man-to-man. All of a sudden, Jeanette's offensive rhythm is completely disrupted. And the Jayhawks, they just never could get back into that first half rhythm. And we talked with some people after the game, and they even mentioned that this has been an ongoing problem all year long for the Jayhawks. Their inability to play a full 4 quarters of basketball. And like you mentioned in the intro, Sean, playoffs are right around the corner. This is getting to the most important time of the season. And if you have a situation and an issue and an ongoing issue of falling apart in the second half, that does not spell for a very deep playoff run.
Yeah, and so Jeanette had 17 points in the first quarter, but in the entire second half, they had 15. So you tip your cap to Sarah Catholic, but obviously Jeanette did not do a very good job closing that game out, especially at home. Now, I said they're still probably playoff bound. They are currently in third place. They actually got a little bit of help in a sense because Clairton lost to Springdale, so the Bears would have been tied had they won. They did not, so Jeanette is alone in third place, but every team in this section has at least 2 wins. So the Jayhawks will still have to take care of business down the stretch. They're going to have a tough one against GCC still on their schedule as well. Well, talking about GCC boys, they got a vengeance victory the other night on Friday. They redeemed their early season loss against Riverview. Wasn't easy for the Centurions, but it seems like this epitomizes how far this team has grown from about 6 weeks ago. They are really rounding into form.
Yeah, and really being led by Tyree Turner, a first career triple-double for him, 32 points, 11 assists, 10 rebounds. That is talking about filling up the stat sheet. And when you've got a player that's being able to do that, again, he's been doing that all year long. It's not like he hits a really, really strong point of the season at the beginning of the year, and then he starts to kind of go downhill a little bit. He has continued to get better each and every single game. And I got to say, Sean, this Section 3 is going to get really interesting, especially upcoming this week with GCC rematching against Sarah Catholic, a game that you and I both had back when it was against GCC, and the Centurions won 72-70. So again, this could be a really, really big matchup this coming Tuesday for these two teams.
Yeah, and so talking about the Centurions and how far they've come, they opened this section play before Christmas. They were one of the sections that did have a couple of games before the holiday break. At Riverview, they lost 58-54. And that was a game where they just could not knock down any outside shots, especially from 3-point territory. Now, in the rematch, they win a little bit more comfortable margin of victory, 79-65, 14-point win. They still had to work for it. Riverview's proven to be a solid team, but I think they didn't suddenly become a great 3-point shooting team. I think they realized after that early season loss, they have to attack a little differently, and we've seen the results of that, Jack.
Yeah, and I think that they're starting to get the idea that teams are going to continue to guard against their ability to, not shoot the ball. And they're going to play for that drive. They're going to just continue to sag off. So as a result, they have to continue to work on it. They've clearly been able to work on it. And especially in this day and age in basketball, right? Let's face it, that's really what is the difference down the stretch in some of these games. And we will mention in a couple games from here that we'll get to in our starting five that 3-point shooting was the difference down the stretch, really. So I think that, being able to finally hit those 3-pointers and again, getting the really good contribution from Tyree Turner, this is where this GCC team is really starting to come into full form at the perfect time of year.
You talk about the very competitive section that the Jayhawks and Centurions are in on the boys' side. On the girls' side, I think the same can be said about 5A Section 3. And we spent a lot of time talking about this because Penn Trafford and Greater Latrobe both reside in this conference, and they went head-to-head where basically third place was on the line because Oakland Catholic and McKeesport are at the top of this section. But it was a big bounce-back win for Penn Trafford, a team that had been playing so well and then really hit a big-time roadblock a couple of weeks ago. But they were to get back and sort of rally for a win against Greater Latrobe, a much-needed 156-45 in favor of Penn Trafford.
Well, you mentioned the aspect of the Warriors having to rally. They were down by 5 at the half, but then they come exploding into the third quarter, go on a 10-0 run to start that third quarter through the first 2.5 minutes of the second half. So being able to play really well after trailing, and I've mentioned it many times before, teams can either play with a lead or they can play in a deficit. For the, Jeanette Jayhawks, they could not play with a lead. But for PT, the girls, the Lady Warriors team, they were able to play in a deficit and still find a way to win. Olivia Peppel has 17 points and Tori DeStefano has 14. And Sean, I think that a player like Tori DeStefano is going to be so important down the stretch of the season for Penn Trafford. Some extra scoring to kind of alleviate that pressure from Olivia Peppel, because let's face it, she can't do it all on her own. She's very, very talented, but other players are going to have to step up. And I think it's been great that DeStefano, as of late especially, has been kind of coming into her own as a scorer.
Yeah, and keep in mind, she's a freshman. So you figure she's going to be better at the end of the season than the beginning of the season. Every player should be making strides, but especially ninth graders, they really, I think, take a big leap from beginning to end. So that's a big one for the Warriors. Greater Latrobe still in the playoff. If it were to begin today, they are the 4th place team, but now just a game up on both Thomas Jefferson and Albert Gallatin. Next big takeaway, well, the Derry area boys, I think, have gone a little under the radar this year, but they had a big-time statement win against Ligonier Valley. And it wasn't just the win. I think they also made a statement and a loss this past week. They fell to Shadyside Academy, which is a terrific team, but it came down to the wire. Derry area was in it to the final seconds, and then they just really dominate Ligonier Valley. So I think you can pretty much pencil them into the playoffs and maybe pencil them in as a team that can make some noise.
Well, I had previously mentioned that 3-point shooting was the difference in one of the games that we would be talking about. And it was this game that we're talking about right now. Derry hit 10 threes. Nate Papuga had 4 of them, and Ligonier Valley only made 1. So that difference right there, that 27-point difference right there from beyond the arc, that's a huge one in a 63-28 final. But when you've got players like Nate Papuga, who had 20, Gabe Carbonera, he had 16. You've got a bunch of different players that can score. And not to mention Papuga and Carbonera, they've been averaging upwards of 19 a game each this season. Really great bounce back win after a tough loss against Shadyside Academy in a game that they were winning. They were leading in the final 28 seconds, and they ultimately coughed it up. But really give a lot of credit to Coach Esposito and this Derry boys group. I know that Coach Esposito told his guys against Ligonier Valley, treat this like a playoff game. Go into this with that type of mentality, and I think they did exactly that, and they definitely left a statement after that win. Yeah,
and now they really solidified 4th place in that section. They've created some separation for both Ligonier Valley and Valley. They've beaten both of those teams. So, again, treated as a playoff game. Well, they won, and now they look to be in a really good spot to make the playoffs. Well, I don't think there's any doubt the Norwin Knights are playoff bound, and they're going to be probably the favorite in 6A, speaking of the girls, that is. And they continued their incredible season. I think this is one of the most impressive stats I've heard, Jack. They have defeated their 4th different reigning WPIAL championship opponent. This was non-section, but man, it was a big-time showdown. They needed overtime, but they ultimately knock off the Blackhawk Cougars in a marquee matchup. So they've now defeated the 6A champs Mount Lebanon, 5A South Fayette, 4A Blackhawk, 3A North Catholic. This Knights team continues to impress every single time.
And you have to give tip your cap to what the job that Coach Brzeski has been doing with this team. And not to mention, again, his ability to schedule these non-conference teams that are really good, that are going to give his group a challenge to get them ready for, again, a deep playoff run. Because I've mentioned it before during Norwin games that we've done, Sean. Norwin girls, they played great last year. If I'm not mistaken, they won their first 10 section games. Then they lost their last 4, and they had a first round or a quarterfinal loss in the playoffs. So it's not all the time about how you start, it's how you finish. And right now they're continuing to keep this kind of going. They're keeping the momentum alive, and a big win against a Blackhawk team that, like you said, reigning champions in their classification. However, again, it did take overtime. They did allow Norwin, that is, the most points they've allowed all year long at 49. The other time they allowed 47 in the loss against McKeesport. But again, a positive sign for Norwin moving forward that they take down another reigning champion.
Yeah, I don't think it's any coincidence that the Knights Athletic Department and Coach Brzeski handpicked defending champs to go against, and Blackhawk, one of the best teams that we've seen for about a decade straight. They lost just one time last year. Steve Lodovico does a great job, so that's a big feather in the cap of the Norwin Knights. That'll do it for our starting 5 takeaways. Now let's shift our attention to the plays of the week. And we're talking about Norwin. Well, instead of the girls, let's begin with the Norwin boys, as the Knights, they edged Hempfield area last Tuesday. And it was their defense and some timely scoring from Ryan Edwards that proved the difference in the victory. That combination allowed Norwin to extend a fourth quarter lead, with myself and Roger Downs providing the commentary.
Sowers. Good defense by Wilson on him.
A lot of hesitation from other shooters on the Spartan roster.
Biondi nowhere to go with it. Woodley lost the handle, and it's the Knights who come up with it. Edwards, and he finishes. Ryan Edwards gets in double figures. He's got 10.
Yeah, there's the hustle plays that Lance Mayhaw wanted.
Well, Jack, it wasn't the prettiest game. There were some missed foul shots, there were some turnovers, but it's a kind of grinded out, gutsy win that you need this time of year. And I'll say this, Lance Mayhaw had a lot to improve upon, but by the same token, it's beautiful because it is a conference win against a rival.
No doubt. And hey, if you get a conference win against a rival, I mean, again, that's the type of, that's a feel-good win. It's a feel-good win that a team can carry momentum to into the next one.
Yeah, and Edwards said it does mean a little bit more to defeat Hempfield area. Well, we'll stay with the Norwin theme. We'll shift over to the girls as the Knights continued their winning ways last Monday. They cruised past Seneca Valley. The defense again was stout, highlighted by the very skillful play of Lauren Palangio as she turned defense into offense, with myself and Jack captioning the pictures.
Every possession seemingly such an effort just to get a shot up for Seneca Valley. Cato probing inside, now trying to kick it back, and Palangio, look at her in the open court, and she finishes.
Great job by Palangio. I mean, when you've got a post player that can take it off a steal, push it in transition, and score in transition, that's an impressive thing, and that's something that I'm sure Coach Brzeski is going to be very happy he's got on his team.
Jack, this is a special player in Palangio, and we talk about that win against Blackhawk. She kind of played second fiddle to Kendall Berger, but what Palangio can do offensively and defensively in the post and around the perimeter just never ceases to amaze me.
Yeah, I mean, she's a mismatch nightmare for a lot of teams, and as a result, I think, opposing defenses, they're going to have their hands full with not only Palangio, but this whole Norwin girls basketball team.
And we will conclude Plays of the Week with the Jeanette boys. And before the disappointing finish that we talked about, the Jayhawks were red hot early on Friday against Sarah Catholic. Nobody was more locked in than Giovanni Marola, who knocked down his fourth shot from distance just moments into the second quarter to add to the Jeanette lead, as called by myself and Jack.
In possession of the basketball to begin the second quarter. Sanders with a good extra pass. Marola tries the other side. The result's the same. He hits another three-pointer. 14 points for Gio Marola. And he's shooting it so well that the net can't even withstand it.
That's the second time that's actually happened. I have to say, as a former basketball player, that is such a great feeling when you swish a shot so well that the game has to be stopped because of the net getting messed up.
really, really big stuff early on from the Jayhawks. And again, I mentioned it. It was the three-point shooting that was the difference in the first half. They just couldn't finish out in the second. But again, really good stuff. If you play against the zone with this Jayhawks team, they're going to be able to shoot out. They're going to shoot you out of it.
That is the plays of the week. Well, we don't waste any time here on the Hardwood Podcast, so we'll quickly shift our attention to the team in a week. And I mentioned we had girls teams all up until this. Well, we now have the Yough boys under the spotlight, and they're coming off of an impressive week and an impressive couple of weeks, quite frankly. 9-7 overall, 5-2 in Class 3A Section 4, more significantly. 4-game winning streak. They had a couple of big ones last week. They redeemed a loss against Brownsville. Now, when they lost to the Falcons early in the season, that was at Yough. They were able to go on the road and get a 10-point win against Brownsville, 48-38. They also really just dismantled Charleroi, which is not a terrible team, 81-38. They also knocked off McGuffey in a very lopsided win against Mount Pleasant prior to that. This team is clearly playing very well in section play right now. And I know that they're still going to have some big tests, including first place Washington, but you have to like the way that Jim Nesser's squad's rounding into form.
Oh, yeah, and especially on the defensive side of things. I mean, they've held opponents to under 40 points in 3 of the last 4 games, and it's not only their ability to hold opponents to that little amount, but also they've been scoring the ball at a pretty high rate. 75 points against Mount Pleasant, 81 against Charleroi. So this is a team that, like you said, Sean, starting to go into kind of pick into form and really come into themselves at the perfect time of year, starting to peak at that time when the playoffs is right around the corner. They just have to carry this through to the rest of the way.
And I mentioned Jim Nesser, their head coach, longtime veteran coach who's had a lot of success, a lot of different places again around Westmoreland County. We'll get into some of his star players momentarily, but I think it's also interesting. A player that you're familiar with, Jack, is now on staff. A Hempfield area legend who played under Nesser with the Spartans is now an assistant for the Yough Cougars. That's the one and only Kaysen Harrell.
Yeah, and I think that is such an important thing that people don't really notice is that when you have a head coach that can bring on maybe a former player that he had or maybe a former coach that he had on staff previously, it kind of allows for that connectivity and that, that familiarity to come back into form again. And also Coach Nesser, he knows that Kaysen Harrell is going to continue to preach the same things that Jim Nesser preaches. So it's getting reiterated and repeated to the guys. And again, not to mention Kaysen Harrell, he's not that much older than a lot of the players. So they have somebody to look up to and say, I remember watching you play. I want to be like you. And they can kind of pick his brain.
And if I'm guessing if he's suiting up at all in practice, he is putting them through the ringer because he can absolutely still ball. He was playing professionally just a couple months ago. So, Tara Crosby, he's their star player, 1,000 points achieved earlier this season, even though he's just a junior. But I was really impressed by Austin Matthews. This guy looks the part, chiseled, 6'5", just a dominant player that not many teams in this section or in this entire classification can match up with. Parker Ross as well, Xander Aird. A really nice team for Yough, that really a program that hasn't had a lot of great success, but think this is a big step forward for them. And now we'll see if they can keep it up. They have Greensburg-Salem in a non-section. They have Waynesburg Central. And then the big one, they will go to Washington to play the first place Little Prexies at the end of the month. That'll do it for our team of the week, the Yough Cougars boys team. Now let's shift our attention to the trivia question. Last week, I asked this one. In this century, 2000 and beyond, how many times has a Westmoreland County girls basketball team won a WPIAL title? The answer, 9. Greensburg Central Catholic winning 03, 06, and 07. Monessen winning 06 and 08. Jeanette in 2010. Penn Trafford in 2014. And the Norwin Knights, the most recent, winning in 2015 and 2016. So that was last week's question. Now here's the new question. Who is the active, longest, continuously tenured Westmoreland County boys basketball coach? So in other words, which coach currently for Westmoreland County boys basketball has been at that spot the longest? So not moving between other teams, but that one school continuously. Who is the longest active coach? You can submit your guess by tweeting at Westmoreland SN. Use the hashtag on the Hardwood. We will reveal the answer next week. Speaking of next week, Jack, let's look ahead. And there's some pretty interesting matchups. And again, we focus on Westmoreland versus Westmoreland, or ones that have real playoff implications, and ones we're going to have broadcasts of as well. We'll begin on the boys' side. Monday, Southmoreland, Ligonier Valley, and a good Westmoreland County matchup, non-section. Tuesday, primarily section matchups. We will have Deer Lakes at Dairy Area. The Lancers playing some good ball. And we mentioned Dairy Area really has peaked recently. Burrell looking to stay hot at Ligonier Valley. Greensburg Central Catholic at Sarah Catholic. We mentioned it came down to the wire first time. Centurions now will have to head onto the road out to McKeesport to try to knock off the Eagles. Greensburg Salem at Yough. We'll see if the Cougars can continue their 4-game winning streak. Valley at Southmoreland. Friday, Penn Trafford at Franklin Regional. We will have that broadcast as well on WSN. Kiski area at Greater Latrobe. Southmoreland at Bell Vernon area. Believe it or not, the third time that those teams will have met this year. Dairy area at Burrell. And then a couple of interesting matchups on Saturday and Sunday. There will be a shootout at Seton Hill University, and it's going to pit a lot of Westmoreland County teams against one another, including Franklin Regional against Bell Vernon on Saturday. Sunday, Norwin and Greater Latrobe. Jeanette against Greensburg Salem. Anything stand out on the boys' side upcoming, Jack?
Well, like we mentioned, Dairy hotter than blazes right now, going up against Deer Lakes. I think that'll be a great one. I'm really curious about this GCC Sarah Catholic game. A little bit of a rematch. Can these two teams keep it going after their big wins on Friday? I think that's going to be a fun one. And then, like we mentioned, our team of the week, the Yough Cougars, can they keep the ball rolling as well and keep the winning streak alive?
Let's look at the girls' side. Monday, Dairy area at Valley, Ligonier Valley at Yough. Tuesday, Greater Latrobe at McKeesport. The Tigers have been very impressive. That will be a big-time test for the Wildcats on the road. Thursday, this is a big one. Norwin at North Allegheny. The Knights kind of shockingly dominated the Tigers the first time in Norwin. I would expect that North Allegheny and Spencer Stefko will have a much better performance second time around. Also on Thursday, Valley at Greensburg Salem, Mount Pleasant at Burrell. And then Sunday, girls action also taking part of that shootout at Seton Hill. Greensburg Salem against Franklin Regional and McKeesport against Greensburg Central Catholic. That could be a good one as well. Jack, what catches your eye for the girls matchups?
Well, Norwin and NA always is going to be one that stands out, but Greater Latrobe and McKeesport, call me crazy, maybe a little bit of an upset alert. Maybe Greater Latrobe takes down McKeesport, bounces back after a tough loss against Penn Trafford, and, takes down the presumably number one, the best team that so far everyone has seen in Class 5A.
And we will round out this week with some college hoops. Monday, Cal U at Seton Hill, a doubleheader. Jack and I will be on that call, both the men's and women's, for the Griffs coming off of victories. Well, Jack, that about do it. Get your final thoughts on maybe the week that was or the week that's upcoming here in Westmoreland County High School hoops.
Well, January closing itself out, February right around the corner. That means that playoffs are starting to get closer and closer. Can't wait to see how this season in both college and high school finishes up, because I think we're going to have some teams that, come down the stretch. It's going to be a fun battle for first place.
Yeah, and I think every game's important, but let's be honest. When you turn the calendar to February, I think the mindset for players and coaches, it shifts into playoff mode for the teams that are either in contention or already in. Certainly, I think you take everything, the intensity, the focus to a higher level. So it should be a fun few weeks here down the stretch. That'll do it for this edition of the Westmoreland on the Hardwood podcast. But remember, you can check us out each and every week. Also, check out westmorelandsports.com every day. We'll have live broadcasts. We'll have plenty of articles. And then follow us on social media as well. Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, all of that. We've got great stuff each and every day, all throughout the rest of this winter season. But for now, we'll put a bow on this one. For my colleague, Jack Ridenour, Sean Meyers signing off. Thank you so much for tuning in. We'll catch you again next week right here, Westmoreland on the Hardwood Podcast.
This is the Westmoreland on the Hardwood Podcast on the Westmoreland Sports Network.